Welcome to preparing your healthcare company for any deal in a post-COVID environment. This session is presented by RSM and Hub International. Let's meet the panel. Doug Gertner, CEO, IVX Health. Matt Wolf, Director, Healthcare Senior Analyst, RSM US LLP. Dr. Robin Clark, CEO, Ursa Health. And your moderator, Blake Weidman, Vice President, Hub International. Blake, take it away.
All right. Welcome to the Deal Preparedness Panel. We're thrilled you're here, and I think I speak on behalf of the group when I say we're really excited to be a part of this conference. We're excited to have this group in front of you today. You know, the goal of the group today is to, no pressure, provide some thoughtful insights to you, and hopefully where you can take some notes, come up with some tough questions to ask us at the end. But we as a unit are extremely excited to be with you. One of the first things that we wanted to do is to expand a little bit on the introductions that were given to us, and particularly around our experience in the M&A arena. I'll kick it off and then send it over to Matt and then Robin and then Doug. But as you can see, I'm Blake Weidman with Hub International. We're the fifth biggest insurance brokerage in the world, focusing on property and casualty, group benefits, and retirement. My role within the group is our private equity and M&A practice leader for the South region. And I've spent the last 13 years in the Nashville market, all in the M&A space, and have completed over 500 transactions. So Matt, we'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Blake. Matt Wolf with RSM. I lead our healthcare private equity team. I'm a leader on that team. And RSM is the fifth largest public accounting firm, and we have a large team of about 50 people focused exclusively on healthcare deals from start to finish. So we see quite a few deals across a broad spectrum, both private equity backed and non. So excited to share some of that perspective today.
Awesome. Robin.
Hi, everyone. Robin Clark. I'm a primary care doctor, ACO executive health services researcher by background and training, and CEO of Ursa Health, which is an analytics development platform supporting innovation in healthcare. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And Doug.
Hey there, I'm Doug Gertner. I'm the CEO at IVX Health. We are an ambulatory infusion center provider for patients with complex chronic conditions, so Crohn's, MS, rheumatoid arthritis, and the like. We have a fairly national footprint, roughly 50 centers across the country, I think 15 markets or so, but excited to be here, talk a little bit about the deal environment.
Awesome. Thank you all. Look forward to some good Q&A here. I think, you know, as we sit 14, 15 months into a global pandemic, we've got to probably address first, like a lot of other panels will be, you know, the elephant in the room that is still looming large. And so I'm going to ask a fairly open-ended question to the group. But the question is this, you know, what has stuck out to you all most about how COVID-19 has impacted deals? And I'll give you some subcategories, you know, things like valuations in deals, timelines in deals, preparing sellers. That's a lot of what we're talking about today. So just some high-level thoughts around how you feel like the pandemic has impacted us the last 14, 15 months. That's kind of a broadish question. So Doug, I'll start with you. Lucky you.
Yeah, sure. I think aside from a temporary pause, that sort of felt like it happened in March and April. I would say that the deal environment's been pretty active. I think for us, and we actually completed a deal this past October, and are actually looking at another business as we sit here today. I think the thing that has surprised me is how effective the diligence process can be in a virtual way, right? And how quickly things can move. I think everyone is so accustomed to on-site management presentations, getting into a data room or even a virtual data room, but spending in-person time with a target and coordinating, all of your different advisors coming in and physically having an opportunity to spend time with your business or the potential acquired business. And, for us, I think what we saw is we were able to move really quickly through a lot of issues. We were able to be very effective telephonically and virtually, just as we built rapport with employees and management at the company that we were targeting. With that being said, I will tell you, old habits die hard. And while we got things nearly all the way to the finish line on a deal that we're looking at right now, I don't think I was ever going to be comfortable writing a check without flying up to go see this business, break bread and have dinner with somebody the evening before, and then going into their office the next morning. But I would say just generally, pace actually seems to have accelerated as opposed to slowed down.
Wonderful. Matt?
Yeah, absolutely agreed. For the first 9 months of the pandemic, humanity spent a collective 15 million years on Zoom calls. So we're very much accustomed to and used to this virtual environment. And we've seen that in the deal process with exactly what Doug said, these accelerated timelines, virtual due diligence, and virtual management meetings, which was unheard of 2 years ago. The other aspect of that too, specific to healthcare, is with the kind of digital transformation that has been pulled forward to healthcare. We've seen a lot of interest from new investors, new companies looking to participate in the massive transformation that is affecting our almost $4 trillion industry. So we've seen this incredible influx of new capital, new interest. And as we have that increased demand for investments, particularly in healthcare technology and a few other kind of subsectors and niches within healthcare, we have increased demand for those businesses and kind of similar number, even reducing number of investable companies. We've seen those valuations increase pretty significantly. It'll be interesting to see how long those valuations stay elevated, if they will kind of come back down to pre-COVID levels, but at least for the short to perhaps medium term, we expect to see increased valuations, particularly in health technology, as a result of the digital transformation that was pulled forward based on the kind of required policy response of the public health emergency.
Wonderful. Robin, what do you see it from your perspective?
Yeah, I absolutely agree that this, the very active markets that we're seeing a lot of deals happen relatively efficiently, particularly with the remote interactions, and valuations are meaningfully high. And I think when I look at the kind of the fundamental themes that are driving a lot of this in the industry is for providers, there was already challenges for those small groups pre-COVID, but COVID exposed those challenges even more, where the fee-for-service providers were kind of stopped in their tracks, while those providers that had some amount of value-based payment component had some cushion. And similarly on the payer side, they were already seeing that there was a need and an opportunity for them to be able to deliver more value, and the changing utilization patterns kind of introduced to them a new perspective, potentially a new paradigm, especially with all these new solution companies that are emerging across healthcare. And for the purchasers, they were already looking for cost containment, and then they saw what was possible from kind of telehealth services and other types of opportunities. And so what we're landing at is those themes that were already in place have been accelerated, and now we're at a place where there's kind of a lot of fear of missing out and a lot of kind of speed to market excitement that we see. So very active, and I think it's driving the valuations, driving the timelines, driving the activity in all deals, whether it's going public or whether it's acquisitions or whether it's new capital raises across the board.
Oh, that's excellent. Just a little bit of perspective from the insurance industry, which I know everybody has logged in to hear about. It's been such an interesting time and challenge, like it has been for everybody. But really, even starting 5-6 months before the pandemic, we entered the first hard insurance market cycle in a large number of years. So we had, rates starting to tick up. We had capacity starting to shrink. We had appetite from the carriers starting to shrink. And you're moving in that direction, and then the world stops. And what underwriters do not deal well with at all is uncertainty. So, what are the risks? Do we have increased workers' compensation claims? Do we have increased malpractice claims? We did see a huge spike in cyber liability. So you had all these things taking place that pushed the insurance marketplace that was already going in a hard direction into a bit of a tailspin. I would tell you 14 months later, it looks worse than it did last March. Everything we do is tied to transactions. So frankly, it's made it more difficult than in a soft market cycle where, IVX Health is making acquisitions. Maybe 2 years ago, that's a simple fold in, right? We just pull the risks together. That's not necessarily the case today. We need to go out and buy $25 million worth of limit because now we have greater risk. That's harder to do. We can't do it in $10 million blocks. We got to do it in 5. So it's absolutely changed the way that we are looking at transactions and the amount of work on our end that we've got to communicate that value to our customers that we're putting into these transactions. So, I'm going to direct this next question to our CEOs. And this is, less having to do with doing deals and more just about your businesses in general. I think people are very interested to hear because you do really have, for lack of a better term, the haves and have-nots of the pandemic, right? Some that, are still trying to figure out how to stay open. Others who have been able to capitalize on the opportunity with some of the digital transformation, others neutral. So, Robin, I'll start with you, but just curious how your business as a whole has been impacted by the pandemic.
Yeah, I think there was the temporary pause that all of us experienced, spring into early summer last year. That thawed, and now it's kind of back to business as usual from a kind of sales cycle approach and perspective. I think actually for us, we're a SaaS company at a core, and so a data processing engine, and so we were already remote first in many ways, and so operationally there wasn't much disruption or change for us. In many ways, we had that silver lining of the pandemic where it's actually easier for us now to maintain those kind of remote first operations in the healthcare industry, where I'm a physician, and so there's a lot of comfort that our industry has in kind of brick and mortar, and being in a big office and being having that kind of standard structure and conventions. I think with the changes in how everyone is working, there's more comfort in our industry in the types of companies that have existed for these last 5-10 years in other industries, going wherever the talent is for your data, software developers, engineers, and being able to interface remotely. So for anything for us, there haven't been any disruptions, and then potentially even some amount of upside for how we can kind of continue to operate in the way we had been before, while being a little bit more accepted by the kind of standard companies within the industry.
Perfect. Doug, I know you and I have talked about this a lot. Your business is predicated on, getting needles in arms, people at facilities, but curious, for you all, I know you completed the transaction in the middle of the pandemic, but business as a whole, what did it look like through the last 14 months?
Yeah, we've been very fortunate. I mean, I think our business has been incredibly resilient throughout the entirety of the pandemic. Like everybody, I'm not sure we knew what to expect in March and April. From a corporate standpoint, went entirely virtual. Obviously, our centers, we're an essential provider, so our centers were open the entirety of the time. We did put in place different COVID protocols, eliminated unnecessary visitors, increased our cleaning and sterilization practices, a lot of self-monitoring for our staff and our patients. I think the insight that was intriguing or useful to us there were two of them, actually. So the first one was, when you think about our patients, they have a complex chronic condition, right? They go on these biologic meds for the very reason that they keep them out of the hospital. So the idea of going off your medication, having a flare, ending up in the hospital, being immunocompromised, and being potentially in an environment where you have a lot of COVID positive patients, that's anathema to them. They sort of said, we're not doing that. What was more interesting to us, though, is that we had a lot of providers who were affiliated with hospital systems, who were used to sending their patients to the hospital to get their infusion or their injection, who said, hey, listen, I don't want you going to a centralized health hub where there's the risk of COVID. I'd rather you go to an IVX Health where they've got exclusively private rooms. It's in a retail setting. It's a much smaller environment of patients because that's a safer setting of care. So that was a bit of a tailwind for us. I think the one other thing that we saw, and I would imagine others in the healthcare industry saw, in March and April, we get referrals from specialists. That's how our business sort of grows and happens. And in March and April, that referral volume was fairly steady. Slowed down a little bit, but fairly steady. In May, it really slowed down. It was the 1 month where we saw new referrals be slower than they were. And we didn't understand that until we realized that, there's a whole diagnostic process before a doctor can put a patient on a treatment regimen. That diagnostic process happens 45 to 60 days before we see a patient. So all the referrals we saw in March and April, the diagnostics had actually been done in January and February. In May, that was the first time where the prior or the preceding 60 days, there was zero ability to perform diagnostics, right? People weren't getting MRIs, people weren't getting blood work done, et cetera. And so we saw that. And then business has come back. But that was a really interesting insight for us, just to understand sort of the downstream effect of how business comes to us and sort of what the pandemic did. But at a macro level, very resilient. In fact, not only did we complete an acquisition, we were able to open 4 new markets in the pandemic, despite some of the constraints that we saw.
Amazing. Thank you, Doug. Matt brought up a really good point earlier in the intro about, digital delivery. And that's certainly something that we all saw either as a business as we sit here in a virtual conference or our customer base. So I want to talk about, what the group has seen from primarily customer base for this group, shifting into that digital delivery. Robin, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's tremendously exciting because I think the world was ready for it, but our industry and my profession needed a little bit of an agitation to make it happen, I think again the groups that had some population management component to their business, receiving some capitated payments, PMPM structure, were able to kind of think pretty holistically about how they would be doing this, not just in a kind of short term to backfill volume, but also to really think about how it becomes a longitudinal part of their population management approach, to be able to augment and to be able to potentially substitute for some of those in-person encounters that they may have had previously. It was certainly months of challenges, and we supported a lot of organizations in helping them think about about their care pathways, about the vulnerable patients, about the opportunities and the different personnel to be able to touch patients at different parts of their journey, post-acute or preoperatively, and how to be able to weave in telehealth services. I think we were fortunate that there were already a number of new technology companies, kind of telehealth platforms that had existed and come into the market over the last 5 to 7 years, and so the actual development of a platform wasn't necessary. It was really more workflows and integrating it into the care processes. I think obviously there'll be questions about how the reimbursement continues into the post-pandemic era, but I think there's also going to be a lot of questions about how we reach the most vulnerable patients with technology who really benefit from that in-person encounter. And as a physician, there's how much of the story are you getting? How accurate is your assessment of a patient's conditions, their symptoms? There's a lot of body language that you take in part of your evaluation, how someone's answering your questions, how they walk into the room. All these pieces that we're going to have to consider about the upsides and potentially some of the trade-offs for shifting care from the clinic, from the hospital, out to the home, to the screen.
The thing that I wrote down was the pandemic being described as an agitation. That was the most polite way that I've heard the last 14 months described. So, Matt, same question over to you on digital delivery.
Yeah, I mean, I think Robin's exactly right in terms of what we've seen across the spectrum with other clients that we've worked with, other companies we've worked with. I want to talk a little bit about from a patient perspective, right? This is something that the patients, all of us, consumers of healthcare who have paid more and more out of pocket for these services have long wanted, is some sort of digital delivery of healthcare, that option for digital or virtual health. And patients in general have long been told, look, healthcare is different, which of course it is. It can't work the same way as it can with Amazon or Uber or Netflix or your bank. And so people kind of understood, or didn't understand it, but accepted it, right? And now they've been thrust into it, and the cat's out of the bag, right? We're not going back. Robin's exactly right. There's $1 trillion question of how will the current emergency waivers for virtual and telehealth reimbursement, will those be codified into the reimbursement framework going forward? In what way? Nobody knows, but the patients don't care, right? They want the option, at least the same way as with our banking, right? Is, after your physical and mental health, your financial health is probably the most important aspect of your life. For some, maybe even more so. And we've long had the option of banking on our phones or on a website, or going in to see a banker if we want to. And so that healthcare will have to reorient or orient ourselves to kind of deliver that mass customization to that patient experience, and it will take time, but it's certainly been pulled forward significantly by the pandemic. And if we think about kind of from the patient perspective, that's what they want, and that's where we're going to see leading organizations align themselves to. That's where we're going to see investment and deal flow aligning towards that idea of kind of this mass customization of sort of a mixture of physical and digital healthcare for patients, as it makes sense to them and their care teams.
Great. Just a few thoughts from a insurance industry perspective. It's not an industry that's known for adapting quickly, moving quickly, and this was a scenario that was really interesting because we are insuring a lot of clinicians and providers, and a lot of which were purely brick and mortar up until that until that point where they were forced not to be. So we saw that shove into this digital service model. And I can tell you this with certainty, you can say this probably about a lot of things with the pandemic. If this had happened 5 years ago with where insurance and particularly malpractice forms were, we would have been in a lot of trouble. So what we had to do is we had to be really, really close with each one of our clients, talking about the ways that their service looked different than it did, the month before. What are we trying to do? Who are we delivering that service to? Where is the licensing appropriate? And then we need to go have very educated discussions with our insurance carriers about whether that's something that's frankly covered or not. 5 years ago, you really didn't have, telehealth endorsements built into malpractice policies. That was something, I worked with MD Live starting in 2012. We had to write that insurance policy. It didn't exist. We sat down and we wrote it with our counsel. So fast forward, 5, 6, 7 years later, thank goodness we were in a better position to roll into that. So, just like a lot of things, it changed everything about the way that we were, preparing for renewals, going out to market, having those discussions, aligning with the appropriate carriers. And that took a lot of partnership with our clients and the carriers. So appreciate that insight from you all.
Blake, I would just say, while our business is very physical, as sort of a recovering M&A guy, I would tell you that the pandemic added 2 filters to the screen that I would be looking at if I were thinking about making an investment. All of a sudden, there was this designation that was created in healthcare that heretofore has never existed. And that was this designation around, are you an essential service or a non-essential service? Right. And so you think about all of these businesses, all of these physician practices where investors have put leverage on a business and that business goes to zero, right? Because they were deemed non-essential and therefore they can't lay hands on patients and therefore they can't generate any revenue. And so, as an investor, I think one of the biggest changes is you now need to look at each of those potential investments and say, okay, one, is this business going to be essential or non-essential if we get back to a point where we have to shut down our economy? And then 2 is when you look at the scope of services that they provide, can any of them be delivered in a digital manner, right? And is there an opportunity to recoup or recover certain of those revenue dollars that may go away? And I think for me, that was one of the biggest shifts. You saw this in ortho, you saw it in dental, you saw it in really big segments of the economy. And I think that was scary. If I had meaningful investments in those areas, I'd have been really, really nervous through the end of the first quarter and into the second quarter.
Absolutely. And staying on the same topic of digital delivery, how are you all advising, for the CEOs, your management teams, for Matt and myself, our customers about, new risks associated with that delivery model? And I think, we've touched on the clinical side. Maybe in this segment, we'll focus a little bit more on data security and managing our customers' information and PHI and things of that nature. So, Doug, I'll throw it right back to you to start that, and then we'll toss it around.
Yeah, I think for us, it really manifests itself more from a corporate standpoint than it did out in the field, because we took our entire intake team, we took our entire billing team and moved those individuals to be remote. And when you think about that, they've got a tremendous amount of PHI that they're dealing with on a regular basis. And so we've got to do a couple things. One, we've got to make sure we set them up remotely so that they can be as productive in their living room or wherever they choose to work in their house as they are in the office. The second thing is we've got to make sure that we do everything in our power to protect the data that they're dealing with. And so, as an organization, we've taken a number of steps, whether that's things like multi-factor authentication that you add, right? Whether that is, closing access to USB ports on computers. And so you really do have to think about how you make your remote workforce as productive, and then you lock down the type of data that you have. For us, the majority of the software solutions we use are SaaS-based. They're hosted out in the cloud by the partners that we work with. And I would tell you, in large part, we're actually very much dependent on their security infrastructure. With that being said, we actually brought in a third party to do a HIPAA compliance audit for us, just to make sure that we had everything buttoned up. We did that, I guess towards the end of last year for two reasons. One, I think it's just a good business practice. But two, I think for the foreseeable future and potentially in perpetuity, we're going to have a quasi-remote workforce. And so the investments we make need to be more longer term in orientation, as opposed to, hey, this is a stopgap measure and we're going to all be back in the office 100% of the time in the future.
Yeah, no, that's great insight. And I think if you looked at, call it April of 2020, there were statistics out there that ransomware events were up 3,000% or more. So again, you've got this insurance marketplace that was already getting more difficult. You have more people experiencing claims. And Robin, I know you can relate to this. A lot of what we're out in the market placing on behalf of our clients is driven by contract. And so if you're working with a health system and they're requiring a big limit, in a lot of cases overnight, those that were asking for $25 million a limit said, actually, we want 50. And it had become that much more difficult for my customers to do that. So you've got kind of multiple headwinds you're facing there. But, from a data security and cyber liability perspective, this has pushed the insurance carriers to a place of almost pandemonium. I mean, Chubb, who's one of the biggest carriers in the marketplace, has changed their position completely on what they want, amount of limit they'll put out, retentions that they'll allow customers to take on. So you have this huge shift, and you do have these cycles throughout time where you've got business here domestically, you've got insurance placements in the UK, and you see that shift from our primary admitted markets back into the excess and surplus line space. So it's a lot more time and a lot more effort to comply with these contractual requirements. Matt,
sorry, what's intriguing about that is that those requirements and those concerns are happening at the exact same time as we're having this emergence of all this innovation and all these solution companies, whether they're dedicated for infusions or for pharmacy or for skilled nursing facilities. And there's so many more interfaces that a health plan or a big provider system or employer will have with different organizations. And so, the data security, the challenges on their internal IT teams to be able to govern the data and to be able to share, which is absolutely necessary to drive these solutions and these partnerships, but to be able to share in a targeted and secure fashion is going to be all the more demanding on those teams. And that's something we spend a lot of time talking with our clients about, is how do you promote innovation at the same time as button down the hatches as much as you can.
Well, and I think too, just bringing it back to the M&A world, I've seen a greater focus on our end on due diligence around those things, right? We want to understand what's going on, maybe in a deeper way than we did, a year and a half ago, about data security measures, about the types of risk transfer that those companies have in place. It's crept into the reps and warranties insurance space, where underwriters want to understand better, what are you doing to prevent these things, to mitigate these things, to transfer risks. So that's become a critical part of reps and warranties underwriting, which, as you all know, and Doug, I know we experienced together, has become a cornerstone of deals. So Matt, what are you seeing on your end?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the focus on cybersecurity and cyber diligence has also been explosive. It's something that we've long done and long talked to clients about, but has basically grown overnight like a mushroom, right? I mean, there was some focus on it beforehand, but now in the virtual environment, an incredible focus on the security around digital environments, how we're handling, or clients are handling protected health information, or even just managing their remote workforce as we've been discussing. I would argue, though, that a lot of these risks had always been there, had always been kind of under the surface, just not really very well understood or focused on. And it's taken kind of this incredible reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic to bring them to the surface. And I think it ultimately will be good, especially as we try to move more into a digital health environment, as Robin was discussing. We do want to leverage data and leverage technology to drive some of the triple aim and other efficiencies in healthcare that we've been talking about for decades. And cyber and data security has to be part of that conversation.
I think the one big change, though, that we're all going to have to deal with is this is important. It's become increasingly important, but historically it's been done in the four walls of an office. And I think the fundamental change that we all are going to experience is now that data is traveling a lot further, in the sense that it's in somebody's home office, it's in somebody's living room, it's going out over a VPN. And I think that's going to be where there's much greater exposure. And I think we all need to be much more thoughtful around how do we protect that data when you have a truly distributed workforce.
Absolutely.
And I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions here. So you're almost off the hook before we kick it over to the live Q&A. Shifting gears a little bit, interest rates where they stand today in April 2021, the amount of private capital that is out there that, people are not going to return to their LPs. What additional value are companies seeking from potential investors outside of those dollars? And I think this would be best served for the CEOs who are out raising money and buying companies and hoping for successful exits at some point. So, Robin, we'll start with you on that question.
Yeah, great. Thanks. It's interesting. It is there's such great opportunity to make an investment dollar so much more valuable than just the dollar. And I think there is some amount of competition now for those investors to be able to wrap around some value-add services to the financial capital that they're bringing. I think the best models I've seen, the ones where there's, essentially they have an in-house consulting team that is available to provide support around recruitment of talent, around kind of go-to-market strategy and design, but certainly the topic of this panel, preparing for an exit, an event, I think obviously if you can complement that with access to partners, customers from a single investor, all the better. But I think those services are best delivered when they are internalized to whatever firm you're working with, as opposed to a kind of a network of different advisors. That's the experience I've had and the discussions we've been involved with over this last year.
Doug, I know you've got some unique perspective from your very successful exit with Change Healthcare and now partnering with the PE group and raising money throughout and the timeline that you are looking at. But thoughts on value adds from potential investors?
Yeah, look, not all capital is created equal. I love a strategic LP base. To me, that's really, really attractive. It's incumbent upon the entrepreneur to use that strategic LP base. And ultimately, when you're working with a firm, you want to make sure that they're willing to afford you access to them. But they can be kingmakers, right? If you think about our business as an example today, One of our investors is McKesson Ventures. Well, access to drug supply is a critical failure point. This is one way to de-risk that. Similarly, when we think about market expansion, oftentimes a lot of what we're doing is helping a health plan enable a site of care program. Well, Health Velocity Capital's LPs are Cigna, Blue Shield of California, Premera, HCSC, et cetera. And so the ability to step in there and have a strategic conversation with those organizations, better understand what they're trying to accomplish and how we can help them, that's the real value. You've still got to win business. You still got to build relationships on your merits. But I think just that access is really valuable that a strategic LP can bring. And I think it is a differentiator. I know at Change Healthcare, the firm we worked with, we took money at a lower valuation because we liked the strategic LP base that this particular investor was able to bring to bear. So for us, I'm a big fan of it. I think it's a differentiator. And I think if I'm an early stage or growth stage entrepreneur, that's one of the attributes I am looking for.
Got it. And you guys are off the hook for a second. But we did as a group, we just wanted to thank the audience for joining our deal preparedness panel today. I know many of you are already planning to join us in the live Q&A. Click the link below. If you weren't, do it. We want some hardballs for these guys. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of the conference, and talk to you here shortly.
Thanks, Blake.
Thank you.